Hello everyone. I'm still sick because this is right after I finished making all of the Christmas gifts that I had to make this year. And now I have to make 4 stockings for my family. So last year my baby son did not have a stocking and he was totally fine with that. He could care less. But this year, my wants and my ability now that I have more free time is to make that gift. And what I'm going to use is a bunch of scraps that I have left over from projects of different things. I'm going to quilt together all of these scraps and then make that into a stocking. So I hope you enjoy and keep watching. I cut all of these up and organize them into their different colors and have them all pinned together. So I have some whites, I have a whole stack of different greens. I also have blues and browns and grays, and then I still have a bit of red and cream colors. I'm going to use this image that I found off Pinterest to kind of base my measurements and then just go from there and see how far I can take these 4x4 squares into a full-on stocking. So kind of mapping everything out, I think I need to do 6 squares by 4 to give me enough flat room to use for the stockings. I think I'm only going to quilt one side to make it a lot easier for myself. In the future, I do want to make a quilt, so I will be taking this to the more grand scale, but for right now I just want a sheet of quilted fabric that I can then cut into to make my stockings. And then I can make the other side out of this muslin just to keep it nice and simple. First I'm going to sew all of the edges with a 1/4 inch seam allowance, and then once I have them all sewn, I'm going to iron them down nice and flat. Then I'm going to attach them together lengthwise. So then I have a giant rectangle of squares that I can cut out the pattern of the stocking that I need. Depending if you figure it easier to do a rectangle and then cut out the stocking, or do what I ended up doing and forego the excess squares above the toe and below the heel to save on time and material. Up to you, but just make sure to lay out your squares as you go so that you know you won't be missing the square that is needed. My biggest tip for ironing seams is to iron it down flat and then open it up and iron on either side of the stitching, and then open up the seam allowance to iron it down for flat, crisp lines. I have all these drawings that me and my son did, and instead of throwing it away because it's a giant piece of paper, I'm going to recycle it into the pattern piece that I will use for the stocking. And that way these little drawings can stay with me forever, and I'll always have them to have use. Let's take the measurements right now, so if you want to copy this pattern, you can. The opening of the stocking measures 8 inches. Then I measured down 10 inches before I started the heel turn. I used a 45-degree angle to draw the bottom of the foot and measured 12 inches. The width of the toe is 7 inches. The total length should be roughly about 18.5. Then you just round out the measurements until you get a stocking shape like this. I'm only doing one side with quilted squares, so I'm going to cut the other side out of this light cotton canvas, which is just a cheap painter's drop cloth I picked up. I wanted to add our initials to the stockings, and since my test stocking left me with a few added squares of scrap, I wanted to use them to create these monogram squares. I always eyeball the letters, but feel free to trace or use reference. I used my regular presser foot to stitch around the outlines, but I'd suggest if you have it an open toe free motion foot. It's used mostly for embroidery, but it makes turning corners and following curves a lot easier. Next was cutting around the stitching to remove the excess fabric, so I was left with these cute letters. With my test stocking stitched together, I went along and caught up with my other stockings and put them all together in an assembly line. Sewing up the long lines of squares and then pressing and sewing them into larger pieces of fabric. I like doing this part where I can just sit down and follow the process. Doing it like this goes a lot faster. And again making these little letters and then cutting them out. I decided to sew them onto another square, then turn them inside out instead of just ironing in the edges, but I guess I thought this would be easier. picking out the corners and then ironing them down so that they stay flat.
Out on this clip.
I pinned them on and they looked so nice, but with every project I make, there is always some type of mistake. I sewed them onto the wrong side of my fabric, so instead of ripping them out, I decided to cut them off, then piece them back onto the fabric while switching the direction of the foot. So I was all set to put them back together. Testing out some new camera settings, so hopefully this goes okay. So now I'm going to take these pieces, sew them onto another sheet of this canvas. This is actually a drop cloth for painting, and it works out perfectly fine for sewing. It was very cheap. What I'm going to do is take these pieces, match them up to these pieces. So I finished all of my quilted pieces in these squares. I have them all ironed out flat. I'm going to add the drop cloth behind this quilted piece, just so that there's something to add more stitching to, so it's not just this one flimsy piece of quilting. After that, I'm going to add the flannel lining, and then I can sew it all up together. So let's move on to that part. I put my stitches to the longest length, then went up and down every line to create the quilted effect. I was then able to cut the quilted fabric into the pattern shape and begun putting them together. They are thick. I start with one layer of flannel, then one layer of drop cloth to prevent the lining from showing on the outside, then the letter layer, which then I sandwiched the good sides together with the quilted layer, and then one last layer of flannel. Once I sew around the edges, I follow it up with my serger, but I had to go slow over some of the layers where I felt like I might break a needle or even my cutter. I turn it out, making sure that I pull from the quilted layer and the letter layer so that they end up being the outer shell. They are very dense, but they are the perfect weight for a sturdy stocking that will last the test of time. So last night I went into this frenzy of just wanting to finish these stockings, and so I think I'm going to complete them today. We're at the tail end of this cold, so we just gotta push through a little bit longer. So last night I pretty much finished these stockings to where they can be used as stockings, aside from adding a strap. So pretty much that's all I'm going to do today. This is the hem from the drop cloth that I had cut off. I think it's going to be the perfect thing to add to the top of the stocking and then add on a loop so that I can hook them on to hang them up. So that's what I'm going to do today. First I'm going to add in the loop, and then the next thing I'm going to do is add a piece of this tape all the way around as if it were bias tape. So everything looks nice and clean. I folded the edge of the tape and then pinned around the opening of the stocking so that I would sew the tape as well as the strap all in one go. I was done with machine sewing after attaching the tape to the top, so I turned it to the inside and folded it in to then stitch it all by hand. I love getting to sit down and hand sew, and apparently my cat loves it too. So I have them finished. I think that they turned out so nice, and I'm really pleased with just the overall look and feel of them. They just feel so durable. Overall, I think that they turned out so cute. I love the different color combinations that I came up with for each person of my family. I was going to leave the back just plain and just have the only accent be the front quilted squares, but then I decided to add these little patches on the back with our initials on them, and I think they just turned out so cute. Would want to make us all matching stockings to have, so this just came to be the right time, and I had just enough time before Christmas to get this done, especially with the other projects that I had done. You can see my last video on that, but I'm just so happy with how they turned out. I hope you like this video of me making all of my stockings this year. I think that they turned out so nice and very quickly, might I add. These only took 2.5 days. I think I started them, yeah, 2.5 days ago. If you like this video and you'd like to see more of what I do, feel free to subscribe, like, and comment, letting me know what you're excited for this New Year's. I can't wait to show you the projects that I'm going to work on in the next year. I hope you have a happy holidays and a wonderful new year. I'll see you next time. Bye.